What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Barefoot Garage. This is going to be a big one. The biggest upgrade I've ever had for my 914. Something that's going to make it drive better, ride better, handle better, and all around just be a game changer. Let's get into it. Start. Alright, so a quick little history lesson of the car. I got my names up here on the side. First person is Chuck Schubert. Chuck is my dad's cousin. He owned the car back in the day, and he's kind of the one that kind of put this together and inspired the way that it is. So really a lot of that was built around the Jackman wagon wheels. They would have been white wagon wheels like you would have seen on off-road cars, Baja Bugs and stuff like that in the 70s into the early 80s. You can see that they were white. When I put them on the car, I decided black wheels is the only way to go. My truck has black wheels. My last truck had black wheels. This has black wheels. I had an F100. It had black wheels. The Naughty truck had gold wheels, but black wheels was the way to go for the 914. But as I have driven it more and more and more, I have determined that tire selection for 15-inch tires, not very good, especially when you have 8-inch and 9-inch wide wheels. As well as compound. They're like 400 tread wear at the best, unless you're buying a drag radial or something that's really not appropriate for this car. So we are finally going to put a modern set of wheels on this car and upgrade this thing with some sticky tires and a little bit less weight, and hopefully be able to move it down the road smoothly. The biggest thing I've been dealing with is that these wheels, when I took them to get road force balanced, 3 out of the 4 wheels are badly bent. Steel wheels of this type cannot really be straightened. There's no replacements out there. Because the car is flared so wide, I need unusually sized wheels. And so let me show you guys what we're putting on the car, and then we'll get into how we're gonna get these modern wheels, aluminum flow forged wheels, on my old vintage 72 914. Old Jackman wheels, ready for it? Boom. New Sparco 16 by 7-inch wheels wrapped in Bridgestone PE 71 RS. New tire back to the United States. If you're outside the US, this tire like went away and then came back. So these wheels are a flow formed aluminum, as best I can tell. They are made by Oz Racing for Sparco. They're literally just branded as Sparco wheels. I'll probably take those stickers off because I don't know, I don't like the blue. And we are using an adapter and a spacer to put these on the 914 bolt pattern. Unfortunately, 4x130 is just not a bolt pattern there's a ton for. So there's the wheel. These are a 200 tread wear, nice sticky tire. Still plenty of width, but this is going to save me some rolling resistance from the 265/50 15s that are on the car that are fine, but not awesome. So there's the wheels. Let's see what else it takes to get these on my car. So this is a while you're there kind of project. Front rotors, front wheel bearings, front wheel seals, new Porterfield pads, and 1.5 and 2-inch rear spacer adapters. These go from 4x130 to 4x110 a pattern. Disclaimer. If you think wheel spacers caused immediate death, you forget that I am the architect of the Naughty truck. This is the least sketchy thing I've done in a really, really long time. If the wheel spacers really bother you, maybe you want to find somebody else that's more of a purist. Back to the regularly scheduled program. So these are made by US wheel adapters, custom to my spec. I spec the bolt pattern, the thread pitch, the size here, the depth, the center bore. Everything in here is specified by me. They even have a tapered seat down here. So the way that it's going to work is these will bolt to the car using a steel lug nut, and they will use the studs that are on the car. And then the wheel will bolt to this, and I have bought these nice open-ended lug nuts that have the same seat as my wheels. So we'll use these 60-degree tapered seat lug nuts. This is very similar to what comes with the wheel, and it matches the pattern of the wheel. Oz Racing sends these studs, which obviously we cannot run with a spacer into aluminum. The only difference that I can tell is that their taper is a little bit longer than this. Try and show you guys that as best we can here. It is a lot like the stud that the Volkswagens have, which is kind of like the ball style. So you can see the difference in these three. So these will go on with steel lug nuts that they're supplied by the wheel manufacturer. We're not using these, we're not using these, and the wheels go on with those guys. We will use plenty of Loctite. I will check them regularly, and I do not expect any issues. So the front is more of the rotors have never been replaced, and I'm gonna take this all apart. It's time to do pads. We're just gonna do this servicing while I have it apart, because once the studs come out of the wheels, or out of the hubs that they're in the front, they screw into the rotors. Once I Loctite them in, I don't want to have to take them out a bunch of times if I need rotors after that. In the rear, those studs go into the hub, and so rotors are no big deal to change, and I've already changed them once. So shout out to PMB for rotors, pads, all these seals, like everything's in stock, ready to go. He makes great recommendations. OE made in Germany, so original equipment quality here. These are the Porterfield pads that they recommend. They are probably far better than whatever junk I bought on Rock Auto when I built the car about 5 years ago. So we're gonna slap those in as well and see if we can see a difference. No way that this doesn't all help my braking abilities. So we are going to go ahead and jack up the back of the car, pull it apart. I'll show you how we have to modify the studs. Then we'll put our spacer on, and then we'll make sure our wheel test fits the way that we want it to. I do think I'm gonna probably paint these black, but at least for now, I'm gonna make sure that they fit the way that I want them to, and then we'll probably shoot them with some black. So I've got my old wheel here, and you can see I put pretty long studs on it. I actually have checked, and they don't make any shorter ones. Well, or they don't make any that are short enough. So let's pull this behemoth off, and we're gonna roll this guy out of the way here. So what we are dealing with, so this is gonna go on just like that. But now that I see it, I might actually leave it silver. In the rear, actually, it looks like my studs are gonna be just fine. So remember, we're mixing and matching here. So these lug nuts are actually 13/16. So we're gonna get these started. These are the steel lug nuts that came from the US Wheel Adapter Company. And I'm afraid that my normal socket's gonna be a little tight in here, so I may actually have to get a lug nut socket. But for now, we're gonna get this all a good test fit, put the cart on the ground, make sure everything is happy, it looks good, and then we will come back and we'll Loctite this all together. So for now, just speed this up here, and then we'll test with the wheel. And we're good to go. This is lug-centric. This is lug-centric. Quick note that I learned is that the 914 is entirely lug-centric. There is no center boss to match into the wheels in the rear, or there's definitely not in the front, at least on these early cars. So now that that is just hand tightened into place, let's bring the wheel over and see what our initial fitment looks like if I have the correct new lug nuts. Be right back. Best part about studs and not the OE wheel bolts is that right there. All right, here we go. Ignore my squeaky KYB shocks. I think that fitment is pretty good. This flare is not flat. If you look at the GT cars, the flares are like squared off. This has like this extra bubble here. So I've got some room in here. I decide if I need to lower it or raise it. But we're pretty much right at the fender in the front and the rear. I think this edge lines up really, really well. And overall, I'm really, really happy with that. So you can see that tucks just a little bit of tire. These are just this much amount shorter. But I can live with that. Plenty of room, plenty of clearance everywhere. Actually, yeah, that looks better silver, so we're gonna keep them silver. So I retract my statement about painting them black. Plenty of clearance in the back, and we can decide if we wanna raise, lower, or do whatever. I think eventually this car is probably gonna get coilover so we can set the right height how we want it. I could see this coming down either, you know, another inch or two, or going up 2 inches and going kind of like full rally look. So you can see what that looks like. And then you can come up here and see what the front looks like. It kind of just tucks the edge of the tire, but it's just so beefy, it fills out that big wheel well really well. It looks a little more like this in the front, so we'll get the fronts on here in a couple of minutes, but that does involve brakes and rotors and wheel bearings and grease and all of that stuff, so it's going to take a little bit of extra time. So I am very happy with that fitment on the rear, so I'm going to pull it apart. I'm going to find out what the actual torque spec needs to be. We're going to get some Loctite on there, and we're going to put this thing on for good. All right, final fitment, pulled the stickers off, torqued it. By the way, that's the first time I've ever torqued those wheels. I'm definitely more of a four-dugger kind of guy. Boom, there you go. Sparco wheels, built by Oz, tucked in on the 914. I think it looks great. The spacer is honestly really well hidden. I went ahead and torqued the inners to 95, the outers to 95. The wheel stud bolts are Loctited, and you saw me put some anti-seize on a stick between the steel of the rotor and the aluminum of the spacer, just as a precaution. Loctite on a stick. I am using blue. I'm not a masochist. I'm not putting red in there. I'm not really that concerned with it because I do check over my car. So from everything I've looked at, this shouldn't preclude me from any autocross track days, anything like that. I've not really seen any saying no wheel spacers, no wheel adapters, anything like that. That's like a maybe once a year or twice a year, once every 2 years kind of a thing. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and then when it's time to get greased up, I'll jack up the front and do both rotors and wheel bearings and stuff at the same time. So I'm going to knock the other side out, and then we're going to move to the front, and then we'll get this thing out for a drive. All right, so this is about the best comparison I can give you. 225 50 16 to 65 50 15. 16, 15-inch wheels. You can see that there's a lot bit more tread on this tire. But as I mentioned, this is a 400 tread wear tire, and it's mud and snow rated. This is designed for your like muscle car, like your 265, 275 fat, wide rear muscle car tires. This is a 200 tread wear, A traction, A temperature tire. It is designed as a not quite a track tire, nearly there. So you can see from a quick comparison, you line that up. The outer diameter is pretty darn close. The biggest difference that you can see is really in that tiny bit of height and that tiny bit, bring them both over here, of tread wear. So all of the width I've lost will be made up in the stickiness of this. You can see just the slightest bit of height difference. Now, regardless of the tire, this tire and this tire are both within like 1% of the factory overall height. So in the end, 70 miles per hour is still going to be about 70 miles per hour as it was with this tire. So regardless of the fact that this is double the stock width, it is the correct height. So kudos to whoever figured this out. This tire was the best option I could get. It had a tire size that was not even anywhere available. It was a 50 series. And so this is what we put on the car when we got it. Great tires. I am not going to get rid of these. Should I ever want to go to a rallycross or do something a little bit more off-roady, probably just bolt these guys back on. But for now, we're going to pop this on the passenger side and then move to the front. All right, just because I happen to have it, comparison number 2. My setup, the traditional Baby Fuchs 4-lug wheels for your 914. So a 4-lug, 195 60 15, and you can see this is slightly bigger than that 195. I think the 195 may be a little bit short, and you can see the difference in the beef from the sidewall. So I don't know, I'd call that 3/4 of an inch taller. I'm not even confident that this measures the same as the whatever 165 70, like the really tall skinnies that would have come on these cars. I know people run 205s on these. These 195s fit and look very, very stock. So there's a good example. Stock, outlaw. All right, time to move on to the front. If you're watching in the time lapse, you saw me take this 1/4 inch spacer off. When I got the car, there were washers behind regular wheel bolts because the wheels, back spacing, did not clear the rotor. You can, or the caliper, you can see where it was hitting. So I solved that by a tiny spacer, and we're gonna solve it even more with a bigger spacer. So one of the things I wanted to make sure is that when this went on, cleared the caliper, which it does, but as you can see, these studs too long. So unfortunately, it means I have to cut them. I've tried the wheel bolts, and the thickness of this piece is too thick for a regular wheel bolt. I prefer the studs anyway. They screw into this rotor, which this rotor is actually the one that was on the car when I got it, which means the newest it could be would be 1978 or 1976. So this rotor has seen some days and some action. I did have them turned. It's really not in horrific shape, but if I'm going to take this all the way apart, I'm going to make sure that this goes back together, fresh pads, fresh rotor, wheel bearing grease, studs cut, this joker in there, and my new wheels on. So I'm pretty confident about the fitment of the 1.5 inch in the front. I have test fitted it with it on the ground and weight on the car. And so this is all gonna go back together, but it really, before I get my hands greasy, I'm gonna take both sides apart, change pads, then we'll go do all the greasy stuff, clean back up, and then put this back together once we've cut these studs. So once they're cut, I'm a little concerned about having a chance to put them in. I think we're gonna have to double nut that because they're really not in there particularly tight. So let's pull this apart all the way down to rotor off. At this point, I'll check everything else and make sure everything else looks good. I think I do actually have a torn tie rod boot. I don't know that we're gonna do that right now, but for now, let's get this thing apart and get it ready to accept these 1.5 inch spacers. All right, we are all the way apart. There are two 19 millimeters on the back of the caliper, one clip for the brake line, an Allen key, and then I just end up using a big crescent wrench to get this axle nut off, something to pry off the cap, and that's really it. So just make sure you give this a good clean. I had forgotten that you got to crack the brake line to get the calipers off, because there's a piece of hard line that goes right here, and with these stainless lines I have, you can't pull it through. So I'm gonna have to end up bleeding the brakes. So I'm gonna give this the best cleanup that I can. It's really not in bad shape. Now that I look at my brakes, I actually have plenty of life left on these pads. So I'm probably still gonna change them. So I'll go ahead and put those better pads in there. I don't know, they should be nicer. My calipers, I rebuilt myself. They are in good shape. Give them a quick blast off. I did not paint these or anything. So I'm gonna just clean these up, and once we get that rotor done, we'll put it back together. As far as the old rotor goes, I will for now save this. All I need to take is this guy right here, and then we'll probably just leave this assembled as is. These reel bearings are really not in bad shape. They're also the original ones that came with the car, and so we'll probably just keep them on the shelf as a spare in case somebody roaches one. The main thing to make sure that it's clean is this inner seal edge right here. We'll get this really nice and clean. I gotta get a brass brush or something, because that's where that wheel bearing seal rides. So we're gonna do the right thing, and we're gonna take this over to the bench and mock up this guy on the bench so that we can get these studs cut to the right length and installed correctly on the new discs, and then we'll start slamming this thing back together, and then we'll get to the other side. I'm going to do this as efficiently as is reasonable, so I can lose the least amount of brake fluid. I do have the motive power bleeder, but I don't really want to have to use that, so let's go. Old and kind of broken, new and I don't even want to touch it because it's clean. We got fresh new bearings made in, I don't know, imported from Mexico. Okay, that's not that great, but that's okay. So wheel bearings, outer, inner, got to make sure we drive the races in. So if you don't have one of these kits from Harbor Freight, this is one of the Harbor Freight things I've used the most, and I'll be honest, I can't imagine spending more than I spent at Harbor Freight for this. So this one has seen some action, but this goes in here, that goes in there, and you just hammer it home with this handle. So it is an excellent way to get these bearing seats in. You're not gonna do it with a socket or anything like that. So do yourself a favor, get one of these kits and hammer these in. So it's gonna be these guys in. We're gonna figure out the stud length over here and make sure that obviously this is the same. And then we will probably tape these together and cut them at once so that when our spacer goes on, like this, we know exactly how far they can stick out. And honestly, I might even just assemble the spacer to it right here on the bench. So we'll go ahead and screw this guy in as far as it'll go, and then we can mark these and make our adjustments and cut. As I mentioned, the early cars are not hub centric. You can see that this is a radius. Same thing over here on the really dirty ones. So there's really nowhere to locate that stock wheel, at least in my car. On the later cars, I think they do have an option to do that. Nope, not on the later cars either. So we're gonna pop some bushings in or some races in with our sweet little kit here, and then we're gonna start dealing with these studs, cut them down, figure out how to double nut and install these guys, and we'll be on our way to putting a wheel on the front. Okay, don't tell Porsche Classic. This is Ford Lincoln Mercury grease. I know that there are greasing things out there for packing wheel bearings. I prefer to just do it the old school way with my hands. That's how I learned. I spent most of my childhood time working on cars, working on American stuff. So that's really the way that I have always done it. So cool tip, this is the inner seal. That's this lip that rides where I showed you in the other one on the car. I'm gonna take one of these wheel bearing installation deals, and I'm gonna put it on backwards so that the taper is facing up. And then once I put this in the edge here, honestly, this guy makes a great tool to seat it down nicely. Give it one hit with Thor, and we're in business. Just a good way to keep it flat, even better than a socket. Boom. So inner wheel bearing, or sorry, inner race, inner wheel bearing, inner seal. We'll flip it. I'll put the outer wheel bearing in when I put it back on the car. Then I'll put that washer, tighten it down, make sure that the drag is correct, and then this will be ready to rock and roll. So just so that I can work on the studs, I think I'm gonna go ahead and put this back on the car where it's clean and safe, and then we'll deal with the studs and the brake pads, and then slam them back together. Let's do it. All right, so change of plans. We're doing this on the fly here. I went ahead and changed the pads, which I'll be honest, they weren't in bad shape, but these are better pads, so they better be worth it. And what I did was I just went ahead and put the brake caliper back on and got this back on. Ignore the cap that's crooked. And mostly it was to minimize that loss of brake fluid. So I think when I do the other side, I'm gonna probably take the caliper off, change the brake pads, and put it back together as quickly as I can, or I'll have the new one ready, just because I don't really want to spend much time bleeding the brakes. So new ones look great. I just need to tap in the center cap there. It's going to be hidden anyway. So let's go up to the bench, figure out the studs, and we'll have one side done. 3/4 of the way there. All right, we've hit our first hang up. It's not a big one, but it just means I'm not gonna finish it tonight. These are the cut down studs. You can see I still have the tape on some of them. And these are my Amazon chamfer tools. Surprise, surprise, they don't work at all. So I ran this on the belt sander and just cleaned it up, but we're gonna need to just tap the end of these just lightly. I believe these are M14 studs. So that means this guy is not going back together tonight. So I will probably go ahead and do brakes, rotor, wheel bearing, and get the one other side buttoned up. And then it's just gonna be a matter of sand, tap, and install these guys, and then we'll be ready to rock and roll. I also kind of figured out there's not gonna be any threaded pieces. You know, it's not gonna have that nut all the way down here at the bottom. So if I need to, I can just grab it with vice grips way down here, because once the studs are on there, looking good, looking flush, it will not contact at that lowest point down there. So we will pick this up once we've had a chance to source a tap. Look at that. I found somewhere to get us some correctly sized Porsche center caps. And I gotta say, that looks killer. So, the Porsche's all put away and ready to enjoy those new wheels. I've had it out once or twice. and I've not pushed it too far, just kind of getting it broken in, trying the car out, see how it feels. It feels much smoother on the highway. It feels much better from an acceleration perspective. I don't know that I've saved a ton of weight, but it does feel more sprightly. It's a little bit less ground contact patch. So from December 2021, when I ordered these wheels from the Netherlands, it took about 6 months for them to get manufactured and shipped from Oz Racing, by way of them being Sparco wheels made by Oz Racing, to get to the place that had them. It took another 2 to 3 months to get them to the US, to get them to me. I ordered tires in May. It took probably 3 months to get those tires because they're a new tire to the US, the Bridgestone RE71 RS. And they said they were in stock, but they weren't in stock. And Tyrek did a good job, got me the tires when I needed them. And finally, we got everything mounted. We got our spacers on, and the car has a killer new look. It totally changes the way it drives and looks. So stay tuned to the Barefoot Garage. I got lots of cool stuff coming on the 914. There's a parts pile right behind me of cool new stuff that we're going to be putting on over the coming months. You can follow us here on YouTube at Barefoot Garage Jacks, and over on Instagram between episodes at Barefoot Garage Jacks. Take it easy, work on your 914, and we'll see you guys next time.